Windows Terminal is a modern application that allows you to use your command line of choice, whether that is the Windows command prompt, Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, Windows Subsystem for Linux, or the Azure Cloud Shell. It is available to download in the Windows Store and also available through Wingit, the new Windows package manager. The code is also hosted on GitHub if you prefer to build the latest and greatest directly from there, or inspect what's going on behind the scenes. So let's search for Windows Terminal in the Microsoft Store. We can see a few apps appear. We have Windows Terminal and Windows Terminal Preview. There are also some Linux distributions that appear in the list. If you want to use these distributions in your Windows Terminal environment, you must first follow the setup steps for Windows Subsystem for Linux and then install the distribution that you're looking to use. Windows Terminal is the stable release, whereas Windows Terminal Preview may contain some features which are still being actively developed or where the product team are looking for feedback from the community before officially releasing. You can see that I have the Windows Terminal Preview installed rather than the stable edition. So let's navigate to our environment. You can see that I have an Ubuntu shell open by default, which is delivered to us by Windows Subsystem for Linux. I have the exact same Linux experience that I would expect. For example, navigating home, checking current running processes, or listing the directory contents. But when I click this drop-down in the top bar, I get several additional options, like PowerShell Core, Windows PowerShell, Windows Command Prompt. You can even select an option for the Azure Cloud Shell. And if you haven't used the Azure Cloud Shell before, it's a container being run in Azure that contains several useful tools for you to be productive when you're working with Azure. You'll also have a file share from an Azure storage account mounted so that you can persist any files that you want to continue working on. So to set up Azure Cloud Shell, we have to use the device code login authentication. We'll go ahead, bring up the browser to log in, paste in the code and authenticate with the appropriate account. Now when we navigate back, we can see which tenant we would like to use. We're going to choose tenant 0. Now it will spin up a container instance for us. We're no longer working on the local machine. We are working on a container in Azure. You can see that we have a cloud drive, that file share that we mentioned earlier, and you can see that I have kubectl installed already and have existing tools installed. Now Windows Terminal is configurable. We can choose the setting options from the drop-down menu to adjust the core Windows Terminal settings, as well as create, update or delete the existing profiles. Let's go ahead and create a new profile called Azure VM SSH via Windows. In case you didn't know, you can enable an optional add-on for OpenSSH client in Windows 10 features, so that's what we'll be using in this command line option. We use the SSH command with the username and IP address of the virtual machine running in Azure. I've already pre-configured the VM to recognize the public key from my Windows machine. And don't forget to hit save in the bottom right hand corner when you're updating these profiles. Now when we open that drop down and select a new profile, notice that it asks for my passphrase straight away. That's my local Windows environment prompting me to use the SSH private key in my windows.ssh folder. Let's type in the passphrase, and you can see that we're logged into the Linux virtual machine running in Azure. Now we can also do the same thing from Windows Subsystem for Linux if you prefer doing it that way. Maybe you have WSL installed but not the optional OpenSSH client for Windows 10. It's a very similar set of steps, but rather than typing just the SSH command, we need to also include the wsl.exe in front of the command. This will ensure that the command is launched using the default distribution associated with WSL. And once we hit save, we'll notice the additional profile in the drop-down list once again. When we click on the new profile, notice that we had a different login experience. That's because I'm using a different private key from WSL, which doesn't require a passphrase. We are once again in that virtual machine running on Azure. So notice that we've been able to use our local distribution of Ubuntu through WSL, PowerShell Core, Windows PowerShell, and Windows Command Prompt all directly from one terminal instance. We've also been able to log into an Azure Cloud Shell instance, which already has a set of tools such as kubectl, Terraform, Git, and more to help us get going quickly and easily. We then also showed how we can SSH into remote machines directly from a new Windows terminal profile, either Windows or Windows Subsystem for Linux, by changing the inputs on the command line for that profile.